Hey everyone, in this video we're going to come back to Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles and specifically his Hercules story. And we're going to look at part 5 of the Hercules story, which is called A Cruel Deed. So at this point, we've been reading about Hercules, some of the things that he's done, growing up, almost getting killed by the snakes, making his body stronger through his physical nature, right? That was one of the things we talked about. And we also learned how he had, shown violence and anger at different times when we talk about the music lesson he had with his tutor, the centaur, right? And how he bashed him over the head and killed him. So he's been showing a lot of his physicality with his violent temper all mixed together. And you're going to see that all come into play here in this chapter. So in the last section, we talked about how Hercules had been to Egypt and he had, been put into chains basically, and he broke out and, murdered some priests, which is not good. In this version, he's going to do another violent act, which is why it's called a cruel deed, but it's going to be back in his sort of home territory of Greece. So he's definitely kind of a young man at this point, which is how the story is going to start. And it's showing you the different things that he did before he goes into his 12 labors, these sort of incidents that show you his personality and sort of the man he's becoming and the man that he'll ultimately be. So we start the story with this. You have Hercules, Yam adolescens Thebes habitabat. So Hercules is your subject, and he's now an adolescens, now a young man. He habitabat, he was living in Thebes, right? Thebes here is just ablative. It's showing you, basically position where. Again, when you have that, it's what we call the locative sometimes when you're showing the name of a city and you're inside it, you can use that ablative ending. So it's just showing where he is. So he's living in Thebes. And in the map here I showed you Thebes is a sort of a city-state of ancient Greece, and it's in the red here. It's right near Athens, modern-day Athens and ancient Athens, right? Right in sort of that middle of Greece. So that's where he's living, okay? Then you have Rex Thebarum, vir ignavos creon appellebator. So the king, the Rex of the Thebans, right? Thebarum is talking about the Theban people, right? So the Thebans. And he's a vir ignavos, a cowardly man, he's described, right? A lazy or cowardly, probably is the best description, cowardly man. Was Creon, right? Creon's his name. Appellebator means he was called. So the king was called Creon, right? It's another way of saying his name was this. So he's described as a pretty weak king. Then you have Minyai, gens bellicosissima, Thebanis finitimi erant. So the minions, right, are this group of people native to Greece, right? Sometimes we call them an autochthonous group, meaning they sprung out of the ground, but they are sort of this legendary group of people from sort of that, what we might call prehistory. There's not a lot of written records of them other than stories like this, but they're described as a gens bellicosissima, right? The most warlike group of people, right? Bellicosissima is that superlative adjective describing gens, which can mean like a clan or a people or a race of people, you might say. So they're very warlike, and they're described as the Finitimi, Thebanis, right? So they're the neighbors of the Thebans, right? So Thebanis here is dative because you have this sometimes what we call a special adjective with finitimi, right, which means neighboring. So in this case, it's really functioning more as a substantive, right? They were the neighbors, but you could also translate it as they were neighboring to the Thebans. But either way, you're getting at this idea that they have the Thebans, where Hercules is, they have this very sort of violent and warlike neighbor called the minions, okay? Then you have legati autem a minius ad Thebanos quotanis mitebantor. So you have the legati, which are envoys, messengers. So it's messengers, right? Mitebantor means they were sent, right? It's passive voice, imperfect tense, right? So they were sent ad Thebanis, right, to the Thebans by the minions. There's your ablative of agent, right? Whenever you have a passive voice verb, you're looking for who did this, right? Who sent them? They were sent by the minions, quotanis, right? Yearly, every year is kind of one way to say it, right? So every year, the messengers are sent to the Thebans. He, Thebas, veniebat, et centum boves postulabant. Okay, so when you say he Thebas Weniebant, you're saying these, meaning the legati, the envoys, these men, these envoys, they came to Thebes, right? So Thebas here is referring to the city, right? And this is what we call the accusative of place to which, right? When you have the name of a city, you don't need the preposition ad. You can just put it in the accusative case, and you're off and running. And if you're wondering why it's Thebas, the accusative plural, Thebes is one of these Greek city names, much like Athens, where they have a plural name for a singular city. It just means you're talking about the city and sort of the surrounding area, if that makes sense. There's not more than one Thebes, even though it's accusative plural. You're talking about the one place. So they came, they were coming to Thebes. And again, the imperfect of Weniebant gets at the idea of repeated action because they're doing this every single year. So they kept coming to Thebes, you might say. And postulabant, right? They were demanding or asking for, probably demanding is the best way to say it. They were demanding centum boes, 100 cattle or 100 oxen, right? That's the tribute that the Thebans have to pay every year, right? So every year the minions show up and they demand that the Thebans give 100 oxen or cattle. The reason why is given in the next line. You have Thebani enem olim amini superati erant. So the Thebans, right? Enem just means like for, right? It's a connection word just showing you the reason why, because you might say, or for, however you want to do it. The Thebans, the Thebani, superati erant. So here you have the fourth principal part of superare, which means to overcome or to defeat. It's going with the imperfect form or imperfect tense of the verb to be. This is pluperfect passive voice, right? So you're saying once, Olim, the Thebans had been defeated or had been overcome or had been conquered, however you want to do it, by who? Again, we have a passive voice verb. We need that ablative of agent, aminies, by the minions, okay? Since we're talking about a group of people, you put that preposition a there. So the reason that they give this cattle is because once upon a time, they were conquered by the minions, right? So they owed them tribute, which is what you have in the next line. You have tributa igator regi minyaram quotanis pendebant, okay? So therefore, igator, because they were conquered, tributa, right? Pendebant. So pendebant here is imperfect. Again, it's getting at the idea of that like repeated action. It's coming from pendo pendere, which means to pay, right? So you could say, therefore, they were paying tributes, right? Is sort of one way to do it. Quotanis, again, every year, who were they paying the tributes to? To the Regi Minyarim, to the king of the minions, okay? So every year they were paying, meaning the Thebans, were paying, or you might even say like used to pay. It's that repeated action idea. They paid it to the king of the minions, right? That's why they're giving the 100 cattle. Then you have at Hercules, kiwe suos hoc stipendio, stipendio liberare constituit. So, but Hercules, right, he decided, constituit, liberare, to liberate or to free, right? His own people, kiwe suos is your direct object there. So his own citizens, okay, meaning the people of Thebes. Then you have hoc stipendio. So a stipendio is like a stipend, a tribute, you might say. It comes from the Latin. It's stipendium, right, which means like a tax or a tribute. And here it's really working as like this ablative of separation. So he wants to free them from, this tribute is the idea. So he decided to free them from this annual tribute, right? And therefore, igator, right, you have legatos, igator comprehendit atque aures eorum abscidit. So therefore, he comprehended, right? So he sort of seized or grabbed, right? Grabbed is probably the right word, or seized the legatos, the messengers, the envoys, right? So he grabbed them again. Here, Hercules is about to show his violent side. So one thing you have to remember is legati, right? Envoys in ancient culture are considered like sacred. You're not supposed to touch them. They're diplomatic envoys. You're not supposed to like beat them over the head or anything like that. They're just delivering the message. So already Herc's decision on how he's going to free them from the stipend is to grab the envoys, which is kind of a no-no. And not only that, he abscided, he cut off the aures eorum, their ears, right? Literally the ears of them. So he grabs the envoys and he cuts their ears off. In other versions of the story, he actually cuts their noses off too. And I think he takes their hands as well. So it's a very violent reaction that Hercules has because, again, he's been showing this violent side. He's extremely physical, and this is kind of how he works through problems, right? He's not always using sort of common sense or clear thinking. So he takes the envoys and he cuts their ears off. Legati autem apud omnes gentes sancti habentur. So envoys, however, right, legati autem, and this is what I was just saying before, apud omnes gentes means among all peoples, meaning, everyone, all the peoples of the earth is kind of the idea. So among all peoples, they habentur, they are held, right? And it really means like held to be. It means they're kind of held up or considered as kind of one idea, but they're held up to be sancti, holy, right? Holy is probably a good way of doing it. Sacred might be another way to do it. They're considered sacred, or they are held to be sacred, meaning you don't touch them, right? There is a religious element to it, right? That messengers or envoys have a connection to the gods. So you're not supposed to be touching them. And here comes Hercules cutting their ears off. Definitely a no-no. And once again, Hercules is breaking with tradition, much like he did when he murdered the priest, right? Or murdered his music teacher. You're not supposed to be doing these things. So once again, he's kind of flashing his anger and his hot temper and his sort of brute strength, right? By grabbing these men and cutting their ears off, which is always a no-no. So again, this section is setting up the next few. You're going to see the minions are not going to be happy with this, right? Why would they be? But it's another good example, I think, of showing you who Hercules was. He is this famous hero. He does represent brute strength. But again, he doesn't always use his clear thinking. He often tends to violence. It's one of his attributes, right? And not a good one. But you've seen in a few of these stories, it coming through and showing and what he does. So hopefully this was okay and the Latin didn't throw you too much. Again, there's a lot of passive voice here, which is really the only thing you need to, really worry about. And the ablatives that go with it. But otherwise, hopefully it was pretty straightforward. If you have any questions at all on the Latin or how I translated it or why I translated it that way, feel free to put a comment below and I'd be happy to explain it. But otherwise, keep reading it. Again, read this out loud. I always say it, find a partner, read it aloud. And hopefully at this point, you're getting used to the style of this story. The Hercules story is bringing in a little more grammar as you go. Hopefully it's making some sense and you're feeling comfortable with it. But if you're not, like I said, just ask for some help. I'd be happy to do it and keep practicing. The more you practice, the easier this is going to be for you. Okay, but good luck and stay tuned for the next part and you'll find out what's going to happen with Hercules and these minions. Good luck.